So it's just these other little funky things, Zach.
Did it stop the Gemini recording?
No.
Okay.
Now it did.
There we go.
Okay.
Thanks. Sorry, everyone.
Okay, we good? Okay, my point is this. We've got these rules, which is kind of the core to us coming together, tied up in litigation. We have a will they, won't they outcome at the end. Simultaneously, we have the federal government pulling back favor, not just favor, but at this point, we're kind of looking towards antagonism towards these types of products. What can the state of Maryland do with the resources that it has to create a marketplace, to encourage folks to opt for these products, to encourage itself, the government of Maryland itself, to seek out these products? So I think that while I appreciate kind of an opportunity to extend beyond, there should be a goal of this group to work towards a combination of administrative and legislative outcomes that we can hopefully move through the body next year. And the last thing that I'll note, just for our perspective as an electric vehicle automaker, we would encourage strongly the state of Maryland to hold to its current commitments on ACC2 and ACT, noting that the likelihood of this lawsuit favoring, our position is unknown. But the reality is that by holding to it, we create leverage for the state of California on the other side. It was noted earlier that, California can easily meet this goal. They can't. In the last 2 years, so much has changed in our industry. And even if California prevails in its litigation, there is not a world where they just sail right on. They're going to have to revisit this pretty radically. So that's my piece. Thank you, Zach. All you.
Thanks, Bo. And yeah, there's just clearly so much to unpack here with, all we've discussed just on this first topic on the agenda and with the hand still raised. So still have time to get to these, but just being sensitive of our time on the agenda and getting to other topics too. Let's move to Josh, Sierra Club.
Yeah, I have 3 points briefly. I have to say I'm alarmed by some of the tenor already in these meetings, because there is apparently an assumed set of facts that we're operating on about the ability to meet these goals and these mandates or not. And I don't think we've ever had that discussion. I think it's really important, if we are going to have that discussion, that we take the time to do it, and that we have, credible people who do not have, an agenda to go over what are some of the compliance mechanisms and compliance flexibilities we have. I appreciate that they are steep goals. I appreciate that they're going to be challenging, but I do think that when Governor Moore adopted these goals, it was an ambitious target, and I think we need to hold to that ambition. I think that to hold that to ambition, I think that moving forward, we really should be talking about not our limitations, but what we can achieve. I think that we talked about, last time a lot about limited money and concern about energy costs and bills. We know we have money. We should talk about that. And I know it's on the calendar for the third meeting. But I would like to emphasize the pathways forward rather than the hurdles as we do this, and think creatively as we do it. Second to last is, with regard to the structure of the meetings, I'm not sure that extending the group, the meetings past their deadline, it would be the right approach. I think this is a time-sensitive issue, and I think maybe having additional meetings between now and December would make sense. And I think if people would like to try to I don't know that 4 to 5 minutes for a discussant to present information really is going to be an opportunity to provide a robust sharing of information. So maybe fewer discussants and a bit more time would be useful. And then finally, while we strive for consensus, we don't operate legislatively as consensus. And I think that, if we have hard decisions to make that, and we can't seem to get there, then we should be prepared to move past a consensus framework. I think the consensus framework is incredibly challenging framework to use, particularly where the regulated industry is part of those discussions. Thank you.
Josh, Zach, can I say something really quick in response to Josh? So,
Go ahead.
Josh, I just want to clarify something. When I made the comment about what we're hearing, it's not whether we agree or not. It is actually what we heard from industry. This is why we're actually where we are today. We heard from the automakers, we heard from dealers that it is difficult for them to meet the goals. I'm not saying I agree or not, but that is part of the reason why we're having these discussions, because we had to listen and hear what those concerns are. So I'm just saying we have to remember that is something that we're all here really to talk about it and think about too. That's it. Thanks.
I appreciate that, Serena, and I think that it is important to hear their challenges and that we can come up with creative solutions to the challenges in this process, I hope. Thank you.
Thank you, Josh and Secretary. Peter is a good segue to industry.
Real quickly, it's been interesting listening to the last two speakers, and I'm not going to get into. I think Shana made a very valid point about not assuming that people are coming to this with some kind of an agenda. But at the end of the day, we talked last time, the purpose of this task force is to figure out ways, either through the state of Maryland or improving the process, to put more EVs on the road as quickly as possible. Mandates don't do that. There are a lot of problems that we have to try to move the ball forward and sell more EVs as soon as possible. That's why we're here. That's why the dealers are here. That's why the manufacturers are here. That's what we want to do. And in looking at the agenda going forward, specifically, there's two things that jumped out at me. We're going to do a lot of talking about charging, and I know we're talking about the public charging. I think clearly, based on working with customers and looking at the market, the primary charging issue is to make it as seamless as possible for people to be able to do their charging at home. If we can get over that hump, the public charging issue becomes, which is going to cost a significant amount of state money, which we may or may not have. That's going to be lessened dramatically if we can get our arms around how to make it much more seamless when somebody buys an EV to get the charging put in at home in a cost-effective and a quick manner. Now, it's one of the things that the dealers need to do a better job, and the manufacturers. We focused on the vehicles and selling the vehicles, and that's very, very important. But we need, when you come into the showroom, we need to do a better job of saying, Mr. Customer, Mrs. Customer, here's the options we have for you. Here how it works. We are working. Our association is working with Constellation Energy to try to come up with a program that we can use in the showrooms to make home charging more efficient. And I think that needs to be part of whatever discussion we have on charging. I know the default is, well, let's talk about the public charging. We don't have enough of them, which is true, and they don't work well. But if you can get the home piece taken care of, I think there's some experts that we could bring in. Constellation, certainly one of them. I think there's others that could come and talk to us. And secondly, as an EV owner, one of the things that I do not have a charger at home because I wanted to experience what the public charging is about. The dealers would like some help. I don't know if it's the PSC or how we do this. We need to be able to communicate to customers what the savings. I know it's not going to be the same for everybody, but what the savings are between, hey, you got an internal combustion engine vehicle, you spend $500 a month on gas. This is, generally what you're going to spend on an EV. That information does not seem to be, readily available or very accurate. And so I would hope we could get some folks in that could explain how that works, because one of the things, that's going to help the sales process is, hey, you're going to save a significant amount of money over what you're spending at the gas station right now, but we have to be able to give them at least ballpark accurate information. So when we talk about charging, I hope going forward, we can talk about the home piece of it, because I think it's really important. And secondly, get some expert information on the costs. How can we reduce costs? I know off-peak charging, those kind of things, but I'd like to see some real numbers on how this plays out so that we can use that as a sales technique with customers.
Thank you, Peter. Really good feedback, and I think more to dig in there in our charging infrastructure session next month. I want to make sure we get to everybody, including those who haven't had a chance to talk yet. So, Cynthia, why don't we go to you, and then I think we'll turn to the next part of our agenda. Cynthia?
Sure. I think, Peter, you're spot on. One of the things I think that we should add to the work plan is education, and how are we going to educate the consumers about EVs and about similar things like you mentioned, like savings in terms of, what can you save on electric versus gas. But I do think we need to go back to something someone said earlier is we need to focus on the challenges that the program is having, and what are those key enablers to get more EVs on the road. I think that's everybody on this call, I think, wants to see that. And I think that's the thing that we need to do. We need to think out of the box also on how we can generate new sources of revenue. There's things like low carbon fuel standards that can help fund an electric vehicle incentive program. But we just need to think out of the box and think differently. That's all. Thanks.
Thanks for that, Cynthia. All right. Well, this has been a really robust conversation. I think we've gotten some good feedback on how to adjust the work plan a bit to be more clear about the goals and some of the places to maybe add some more discussion on the key topics that will address education, some of the regulatory tools, outcomes around ACC and ACT litigation, which it still will be uncertain at that point, but some more discussion there, and we can certainly take back and discuss more about additional time for the work group to meet if that's something that we can do between now and December or after. So we will we'll take all this feedback and compile it. So with that, Shayna, do you want me to turn it back to you to introduce the second part of today's agenda?
Sure. Thanks, Zach. And thank you, everybody. I really enjoyed that conversation. I think it's great that we have so many people who are so impassioned and who know so much about these issues to help us kind of walk through all of this. So I know at times it can feel a little uncomfortable, but it's important, and I'm really glad we're doing it. Sorry, now my tech is just failing me today. I can't seem to bring anything up on either device at this point. So if you wouldn't mind leading us into the next part. Goodness.
Sorry,
You're on mute.
that was human error, not tech error. Okay, so happy to do so. So today's focus conversation is on incentives. This was a topic that came up already with respect to a few different areas for further discussion at our first meeting in July. And we wanted to start digging into several topics with respect to both light duty and medium and heavy duty vehicles around what is Maryland doing, what works, what doesn't work, where could resources be shifted to have more impact, and how do we think about the impact of every dollar with respect to our goals of reducing emissions and pollution and getting more vehicles on the road. So to help contextualize that conversation, we have presentations coming first from the Maryland Department of Transportation with a focus on light duty vehicles, followed by the Maryland Energy Administration with more discussion of state incentives on medium and heavy duty vehicles. And then we'll have a few discussants to help us kick off our discussion, and then welcome or just another robust discussion from the whole group for the remainder of our time. So, Joe, am I turning it to you?
Yes, sir.
And and I need to stop presenting my screen so you can present yours. Go ahead.
Thank you, Zach, and thank you, everybody. Joe McAndrew here, Assistant Secretary of the Maryland Department of Transportation. In the room here is Morgan Ellis. You can't see her. There she is. And Darren Lovas of the team. Darren's going to pull up some slides. I'm going to be quick and breezy just to give everybody kind of foundational understanding of what the Maryland EV tax credit looks like and how it's operationalized over the last couple of years. So give just 1 second here. Sorry. Again. There. You can't see it. Why can't you see it? Can anybody see the slide deck, or you guys all see it? A big D.
That's Darren's D.
Why isn't it showing? Sorry.
Zach, do you have MDOT's presentation? Maybe you can share and Joe can speak to it.
I do not have it. But
hang on, Zach. I can give it to you, Zach.
yeah, Morgan, if you want to send, I can.
Yeah.
Why isn't it showing? It says I'm presenting. Look at it.
All right, Zach, it's coming your way.
Thanks.
Sorry.
Yep.
It's not good.
And Diego, if you want to send me yours while we wait, just in case we have issues when we get to MEA's presentation.
No, still big. To expedite, there are some flashy slides that are coming, but I will go ahead and just kind of start chatting. The state of Maryland has an EV tax credit. It was created under the Clean Cars Act of 2022. Ultimately setting up a tax credit for fiscal years 24 through 27. So it sunsets in 2027. Each year, MEA, as part of the requirement, shall allocate the state Maryland Department of Transportation $8.25 million from the seed fund to the Transportation Trust Fund. We then allocate those dollars to the Maryland Motor Vehicle, MDOT Motor Vehicle Administration to distribute those tax credits in partnership with those that purchase EVs and plug-in hybrids. A bit about the program details. The amount of the tax credit, it depends on the type of the vehicle. So some of the stuff that I'll say are averages, but it varies by type. You know, $1,000 tax credits available for a two-wheeled zero-emission motorcycle, $2,000 tax credit for three-wheeled zero-emission motorcycles, $3,000 for a zero-emission vehicle. Vehicles must be purchased on or after July 2023, but before July 1, 2027 to be made eligible. Again, we only have $8.25 million per year. And so once those dollars are expended, we need to wait for the next fiscal year to open up. To date, under the current program, through July 23 through August 8th is when we pulled the data last. We've issued 8,250 credits worth a total of $24,750,000. Zach, if you want to go to slide 3, or yeah, that one right there, perfect. You can see here kind of where we've spent, how many we've got, and how many we have remaining, and then FY27, which is our last year. So just a little bit more information. All of the tax credits available to us in fiscal year 2026 have been allocated. They were gone almost immediately upon start of this fiscal year on July 1, 2026. And what we are doing is those that were not paid or those that purchase an electric vehicle eligible for a tax credit, from that point going forward, they sit on a wait list until the next fiscal year starts. So you can see on the right, right now we have 852 vehicles, approximately 1,200 credits remaining, 852 vehicles in the queue, and roughly 30% of next year's allocation already expected to be expended as of today, but ultimately we cannot allocate to Marylanders until next year. Just a little bit of history on timing, and I think this shows kind of demand for EVs. For fiscal year 2024, we exhausted our funding in January of 2024, so about 7 months after the start of the fiscal year. For fiscal year 2025, we have announced that we had exhausted all of our funds available that year in August of 2024, so 2 months. For that fiscal year 2026, as I said, the funding was largely immediately exhausted upon start of the fiscal year, essentially to pay for the prior year's wait list. And at this point, we expect that we will exhaust the remaining program dollars before the end of the calendar year. These customers will be paid should we have allocated resources available to us on July 1, 2026. We expect that there will be more individuals in the window of time available for this program before it sunsets, requesting a tax credit than available funds available to us. We will continue to maintain a wait list in the off chance that additional funds are made available for those individuals. But as of this moment in time, that is not currently on the table. NBA, Chrissy and team, their administrative advisor, works closely with our dealers and our partners on the private side, and we'll continue to work and to manage customer expectations at the dealership. But this is a challenging time for the program as we look towards that sunset towards next year. Next slide. So a little bit more context here of kind of what this means from a GHG benefit, which is kind of one of the aims of the program. We've allocated $27.75 million in total for $8.25 million per year. That's 8,250 total credits and approximately 2,700 credits per year. Putting it into GHG reductions, that's roughly 72,000 total tons of emissions reduced, or 24,000 per year. Putting that into context, a U.S. household emits approximately 8,000 pounds of CO2 per year. So bang for your buck, certainly an incentive for folks on the other side, but maybe a proper time to evaluate, is this the best use of limited resources for maximum benefit? But certainly a program that's in demand if that is a core goal for it. So next slide. So just quickly and understand, Zach sent around a number of questions in the agenda that we'll talk about. A few from where MDOT sits. Budget considerations make this a challenging program. Oversubscription is a challenge from us from a government perspective, but I'm sure throughout the entire program, from our dealer partners to the consumers and Maryland residents. And then ultimately, a sunset is a nice forcing function to ask the tough questions of shall you continue moving forward, shall you reevaluate and pivot, but ultimately that's what we're assessing, and look forward to having the discussion with this group on the best path forward. And then last slide for folks, 2 items. We're back here. One of the items that was discussed before was data and strategy. We touched on this in the first meeting. I'll touch on it again. We have the ZVIP, Zero Emission Vehicle Infrastructure Plan for the state. It is in development. We would love to meet with each of you to gain your feedback, because it's only as valuable as the broad stakeholder, public, private, nonprofit working together and forming the end product. I won't say who, but one of you took us up on that offer between last month and this month. I'd love all of you to take us up on this offer over the next month. So please go ahead and scan that QR code and get in touch with us. The other bright spot, while I got the mic, Navi's in a good spot. And we're closing out our round 2 RFP late August. So any and all friends that are applying or have folks that they want to encourage to submit, please do so. We are excited. We think we'll have a successful funding round, and all funds are available to the state of Maryland to deploy, and we look forward to maximizing and improving our EV charging infrastructure with these federal funds. With that, I'll pause and just hand it back to Zach, but appreciate the opportunity.
Thanks, Joe. Appreciate it. And we'll hold comments and discussion, I think, until we get through the full presentation. So I'm going to pull this down. Diego, would you just like me to go ahead and share your slides?
Yeah, that'll work. Yeah, if the formatting's off, I'll try and share, but let's go ahead and have you share first. All
right.
Perfect. So yeah, my name's Diego Lopez. I'm the section chief for clean transportation and innovation here at MEA. And I'll go through also very, very quickly a lot of information. You can always go back and drill down more information. But the first kind of bullet point here, we want to go over the EV owner's journey. How does someone get an EV? How does a fleet manager get an EV? This is where we're really going to be showing the problem statement, the challenges. The incentives are next. We'll show you what MEA is offering, what local incentives are out there, and how they're pairing to maybe match some of the gaps. But still, at the very last portion, we'll go over some of the highlights or considerations where there's still gaps, there's still going to be some challenges. And it speaks to, again, if we're looking at these programs that are sunsetting in FY27, what would we like to see going into the future, echoing all of what was already said. Next slide here. So we'll just dive deep first into an EV owner's journey. And really, again, this is setting up what are the challenges. And this works really for a homeowner as it does for a fleet manager. First, they have to do an inordinate amount of research. And someone was mentioning outreach, education. Back in Colorado, they have something called the Recharge Colorado program. It's a EV coach. They help with the research. They help with the purchase process. They help with the incentives. Although in Colorado, they don't have a point of sale incentives, which would really help along with dealers here. They have regular rebates. And because they have these coaches coaching these stakeholders, homeowners, business owners, fleet managers on how to apply for these grants, apply for these rebates, look for the best purchase, look for the best time, what works for them. I think that they have a very seamless transition and something that really could work here. In addition to that, something that is still a barrier is charger purchase and install, finding the right electrician, charging at home versus charging in the public. The reliability of both are still things that we're wanting to work on. And then also research into long distance travel or services. So hopefully this slide here really echoes or supports the need for that outreach, the need for that education, and public-private partnership with dealerships to work on the EV owner's journey or a fleet manager's journey. Go ahead and go through the next slide. So, again, the incentives that help some of the processes, either with chargers, first is this EVSE rebate. It's for homes, it's for businesses, it is for fleets, but something that has been echoed to us, that we've gotten feedback, is that a fleet might need a much larger charging station. A home and a business can get by with a level 2 charger, and for the level that we have, it's 50% up to $5,000 for a business or a fleet that might not meet the needs of what a fleet might need if they're just looking for charging stations. What you'll see continuously is that if we are looking at a piecemeal approach, it might not work as much as a comprehensive approach, which is really echoing the electric school bus grant program here next. It's a very comprehensive program. It includes funding for training, for planning, the school bus, the charger, and we've seen schools that inevitably would not have picked a school bus to adopt an electric school bus this year, but they're going through with the training, they're going through with planning as a means for a first step. So that's something that we've gotten some feedback on, is that it's not just about the vehicle or the equipment. Sometimes moving the market means just starting out with a plan. How many chargers do you need? The medium heavy duty vehicle program is another somewhat of a piecemeal program in the sense that it's EV incremental cost only. And so we're really looking at those vehicles, tackling those vehicles in particular. So fleets may need a little bit more support, whereas again, multifamily and community electrification, it encompasses all things that a community would need. If they're needing to start with planning, they can start with that. And we've even seen some take up our offer for outreach funding as well. Next slide here. What I know is consistent is that federal programs are going away, but I want to highlight that local partnerships or local governments are taking a large stride and filling a large amount of gaps. From Frederick County to Howard County, they have their own charging station rebates. If we start working more with local governments to work to see where their pain points, where their gaps, we can put and maximize our dollars spent. Go to the next slide here as well. This is another local partnerships of more of a group buy, an EV group buy purchase agreement. So this has worked in Colorado and in other states as well. Purchasing a large amount of vehicles at once lowers the cost of the vehicles. So somewhat we've seen $2,000 to $3,000 extra of an incentive for purchasing more than 50, more than 60 vehicles at a time. And this is something that local governments are already trying to facilitate and educate their population. Next slide here. So again, we're diving through, we have our own incentives. Local governments have their own incentives. Utilities have their own incentives. This is really just funneling down into a community model consideration where, again, where we are seeing the most successes is in this community grant in particular. We had $39 million in requests. We were only able to award 44 applications. We had 180 applications submitted. So it's 180 different multifamily units needing all different types of components to move them forward into adopting EVSEs. And so again, what we've consistently seen for that program is we tackle reliability, equity, we focus on the specific locations, and in particular, we'll see in the next couple of slides, how many EVs are served really boosts the amount of GHG or air pollution that we'll be able to reduce. Go to the next slide here. And so I want to speak to, again, what are these emissions considerations that we're looking at? When we're looking at the EV rebate program, Think of it as a 1-to-1 or a 1-to-2 type of program. When you get a charger at your home, you get 1 EV or serve 2 EVs. That can reduce a significant amount. And we're trying to compare apples and apples. It's about 1,000 EVs with 15,000 miles. We're trying to compare annual GHG reduction. You're going to reduce 30,000. If you're looking at this community grant program, again, thinking that this charger is going to serve and a larger amount of EVs, we can extend that GHG reduction to 98,000 annually. So maybe there is a cost benefit analysis of how much money needs to go towards home, how much needs to go towards community holistically. So go to the next slide here. So I'm wanting to also, again, dive deeper into the fleet, and light duty was brought up. Light duty fleet programs, this is in red because we don't have one. And we should consider it, but consider that, again, with 1,000 vehicles, with the X amount of miles annually, you'll maybe reduce around 38,000. So it's not a significant amount. If you increase the amount of VMTs, so you look for those specific fleets, you can increase the amount of GHG. However, look at the ESB, the electric school bus program. Look at the medium heavy duty, the transit, the school buses, the refuse, the ones with more miles, the ones that serve more people. Those are going to reduce a significant amount more money, a significant amount more GHG. So these are the types of considerations. If you're looking at emissions, consider those. Next slide or last slide here. So again, when we're looking at a fleet program, this is where really we're reducing the most amount of GHG, but it's still similar to a community-based program. We need something that's comprehensive, including all of the different components. We need to use maybe some other types of filters to look at high-use vehicles, look at location and equity. We need to look at a percentage of grant. Is the incremental cost good enough, or should we just cover a percentage? And then again, the high GHG, what are the high VMT, high emitter vehicles that we're looking for? So these are some of the considerations. We can dive deep into any one of these programs, but that's about it. I'll put it back to Zach here.
All right. Well, thank you, Diego and Joe and your teams for helping us contextualize some of the considerations with respect to incentives, especially within the resources that Maryland is deploying currently on this. So to move forward, Shana, would you like me to turn it back to you, or should I continue on to our discussants?
Yeah, I mean, I'd like to know if anyone has any thoughts about anything that they just heard. Those were two really good, informative presentations. So just wondering if anyone has any reflections.
Lewis.
Hey, thanks, Zach. Actually, so one thing that Diego mentioned about the Colorado Coaches Program, I think that is a spectacular concept, because, I've given some presentations in the past and talked a bit about the sort of lack of, I'll call it a gatekeeper, when it comes to trucking, where when you have an interested fleet, you feel overwhelmed by all of the different, fragments relative to, I've got to go with my utility company. Oh, what about my truck dealer? What about my OEM? How am I going to manage, A, B, C, and D, where are the grant programs? And so I do think that that is a barrier to people who operationally can consider an EV, where they get turned off because it's such a more complex approach. And so if there's a mechanism to have that sort of single point of contact that can help coordinate all of those various entities, that could at least reduce a barrier.
That's a very interesting idea.
Excellent. Thank you. Bo.
Yeah. Hey, thank you for those presentations. They were really helpful. I just want to hit on kind of what I had said at the beginning is a desire for this group to kind of consider a legislative product at the end of this. Kind of the passenger incentive is the kind of exact purpose why. While we can appreciate how generous Maryland's incentive is, it's also kind of difficult to describe it as an incentive because it's more of a lottery. Given that only so many people get it each year, and it runs out, and now you're on a wait list, we're not actually pulling people in who otherwise may not consider. We're pulling people in who are already going to do it anyway, if that makes sense. And so I think this is a great group of folks to have kind of honest conversations about how we can make the most of the funds that we have to reach the most people. So.
And Zach,
Excellent.
I have inadvertently cut into the discussion section with this prompt. Please stop me and redirect.
No, honestly, I think we'll get to everybody, through this. So why don't we take Ben and Josh, your comments, and then we can move to and is that Rachel? I can't see everybody's full names. Why don't we take these comments whose hands are up, and then we'll move to our discussants and just continue the conversation from there. So Ben?
Thanks, Zach. I think that this is for Diego on the community program. I know for utilities, when we allowed them we did incentives both directions, give customers money for multi-unit family dwellings to install chargers versus allowing utility ownership. And we saw the utility ownership model was actually the preferred method. There was really not a lot of take up from customers to use the method where the building owner wanted the incentive. They wanted the utility to do it. So I guess I'm just curious on your incentive, what you're covering through these community grant programs and their structure. And I guess the other side thing, I do like your point about focusing on your biggest bang for your buck on the dollar GHG savings by maybe focusing on some of these bigger but maybe harder to electrify groups than the smaller dispersed one-off residential and small commercial.
Good question, and let me know if I answer it in the best way here. So the community grant program, to your point, utilities might actually be covering certain things. What is our design? We broke it up into the 3 different components. So EVSE planning is its own separate component. You get a percentage of the total cost of the plan up to a cap amount. The make ready is essentially what typically utilities cover. So the pre-wiring, the panels, the transformer, all of those things, we're saying that we're covering 50% up to a certain cap. And then everything outside of that, the charger, the signage, maybe, we're covering a larger percentage, 90% and above, because usually that's not covered within most programs. Now, within local government programs, we are seeing that they're covering a multitude. It's usually a total cost of a project up to like $10,000. But it's also going to be at our discretion as well, looking at their project plan, what they're going to be using that install funding for.
But the ownership model you're not seeing as a barrier, where the multi-unit dwellings, the people that have to operate, are viewing them as the operator as the barrier.
No, if anything, most of these these property managers don't want, if they knew how easy it was, they probably would take it on and they would look at it as a money-making machine. But they're looking at it as kind of their pool, and so it's maintenance. If they can pay a 10-year kind of contract, they're totally fine someone else having ownership of their charger. Granted, that goes back to the education piece. If they really knew it's lower maintenance, a lot of these maintenance packages can be bought ahead of time. So there's a lot that we can improve on.
Awesome. Thank you.
Josh, and then Ramon.
Yeah, first, thank you for the presentations. I thought they were really helpful. I too really appreciated the sort of the dollar per ton perspective as well. I want to respond to, I hope it's acceptable to use people's first names in this context. I'm not sure how to pronounce everyone's last names, but Louis, your comments on fleet adoption and sort of the challenges to that. I wanted to flag that commissions, PSCs, and a score of many other states authorize utilities to provide fleet advisory services, and those fleet advisory services can really help provide the expertise. I wouldn't call it a one-stop shop because they're not going to be telling you about different vehicles, but they can really facilitate a lot of the sort of education and familiarization with the benefits and the costs of electrification. I really wanted to encourage everybody, including Peter, to participate in Maryland PSC proceedings. It really helps the commissioners have a more robust and informed conversation and make more robust and informed decisions. I think something that I really underscore here on costs is that the costs can be really defrayed for the charging infrastructure, especially if programs provide for vehicle to fleet charging for fleets that fit that that sort of profile, which is typically school buses most uniquely. Also, depot charging overnight, it really can help reduce costs. And I just think that this has been a terrific conversation already. So thank you.
Thanks, Josh. And I think that those are some topics we'd love to, it's good to dig into them here on the incentive side, but then also thinking about in the context of the grid and PSC work and infrastructure conversation over the next two meetings on the work plan. We'll have a couple of other lenses through which to dig into those. So would love to connect about how to make sure that conversation hits everything it needs to. Ramon.
Thank you, and thank you for the great presentations. I do have a couple of, just a quick question. Are any of these programs include incentives for used vehicles, and also if any of the programs collect demographic data that can be shared? It seems to me that that data could be very important to, kind of figure out targeted education programs. So, make sure that incentives are more effective, whether they're targeting areas that are overburdened by pollution and things like that. And also if those programs are bringing new customers that otherwise without the incentive would not be part of the, would be interested in an electric vehicle. So if there's any data that can be shared, so whenever we have those conversations might be informed by that data, especially towards policy. Thank you, but great presentations.
And I can answer for us. We do not have anything for used or anything like that. MDOT, I know that for older vehicles, they can get awarded funding, but it's not similar to like Colorado's vehicle exchange program. That's not what we have right now.
Similar here, and we don't. It's for new purchase acquisitions. We're checking with NBA on what we can get on demographics. We certainly have car type and where the car was purchased, but that may be the full extent.
Oh, thanks, Diego and Joe, and thanks, Ramon, for those questions. David, I see your hand up. Is it specifically on these questions or something else? Because I'd like to come back to you if it's moving on to another topic.
No, it was specifically about sort of this incentive. I guess, yeah. I mean, I wanted to sort of lift up something that Bo had said, and actually it complements, I think, what Ramon raised here earlier. Just now in that, when I think one of the things about the EV incentives in particular is the question of what is the marginal what are we doing to actually increase purchases of EVs as opposed to and a lot of the data on EV incentives, some of the data that was coming out of California that I know that UC Davis has looked at had those numbers that like half the people would have purchased an EV anyway. So you're sort of double spending, right? You're spending twice as much to move those folks, and that's becoming more important now that we get to a little bit more mainstream. But I think like thinking about ways that, given the finite resources, that you can think about capping it for the people where this actually is going to make a difference at the margins is something that that obviously is very critical. And I'm just wondering, to what extent, that you've done any follow-up surveys or anything like that with folks who have purchased. Have there been, has there been any efforts in Maryland with researchers to sort of circle back with people who did, purchase EVs and see how important the incentive was? Because to Bo's point, the fact that it is becoming now like a lottery, that's already like a reduced incentive. We know the difference between tax incentives and rebates, and there's like a lot of that. So I'm just curious, is that something that's been studied here in Maryland?
Diego or Joe and Morgan, Darren, any information on that?
For us, for our program, because it's we have CFIP and MHD that we can go back to our fleets and we can ask. We've asked anecdotally per fleet, what is your cost for maintenance? And we do know that we have gotten that information, that their cost per mile and their cost per maintenance mile is lower than diesel. So they are saving money. But that's maybe 2 to 3 fleets that we've spoken to. So that means that it speaks to you having telematics, needing maybe more studies, and it's something that we really need to do more of.
Yeah, we have a dated analysis of our product. We can certainly pull that information up, share it around.
Thanks for that. So I think this is actually a really good segue into, we had a couple, folks teed up to share some, brief but prepared thoughts on these topics. And so, with thanks to Peter Kitzmiller and Delegate Stein and Cynthia Williams for offering to help, share their perspectives on this. Peter, if we could start with you, I think that's a great segue because you had raised these very questions at the first meeting in July around the best, most impactful way to deploy this. And I do like, Bo, the way that you framed it is it's become a little bit more of a lottery than an incentive. And so how can we think about, the right way to structure this and other areas where from your perspective as, a voice of the dealers and having conversations with that part of the industry, can we be more effective in our resource deployment? So we'll start with you, Peter, and then Delegate Stein, if we could turn to you, and then Cynthia, if you could round us out.
Sure. Thanks, Zach. Unfortunately, I think Bo's description of our current program is accurate. I think the previous panelists did a great job of explaining all the nuts and bolts of the Maryland program. Everybody's probably aware, but I just want to start with, the $7,500 incentive, a federal tax incentive that people have been getting goes away on September the 30th. There also is a used vehicle incentive. They all go away on September the 30th. If you look at the EV sales market, it's becoming more mature. Tesla's been around 12 years, and most of the manufacturers have been in the market now, 3-4 years. By the end of this year, I think every single manufacturer that sells vehicles in the United States will have at least one EV model. So the market is getting more mature. For the last 18 months, 2 years, every manufacturer, excluding Tesla, has seen pretty significant sales increases on EVs, without question. I think the biggest driver of that has been for the last 18 months that leasing an EV is dramatically cheaper at this point than leasing an internal combustion engine vehicle. The cheapest lease that Honda Motor Company has is their EV. It's cheaper than their entry-level Civic, and that's been driven by very aggressive discounting by the manufacturers and the dealers. But in addition, the $7,500 tax credit, those three things have resulted in lease payments that are, in a lot of cases, $150, $200 or more less than a comparable internal combustion engine vehicle. And that has brought people in to the showroom, no question. Now, there's some people that were absolutely going to buy an EV anyway, but we have converted people that may not have considered it when they looked at how much money they could save. Now, we've been leasing about, I think in Maryland, these aren't 100%, done, but 75% of what we've been doing the last 2 years has been leases. And that's simply because under the way the federal program was written, and I have no idea why they did it this way or they intended to do it this way. In order, everybody that leases a car gets the $7,500. If you buy it, then you have to determine where the battery was built, where the materials were mined. So almost all these vehicles have been leased over the last 2 years. Now, obviously on September 30th or October 1, that goes away. And, talking to one of my dealers yesterday who sells a pretty significant number of EVs, the loss of the $7,500 tax credit is going to add about $200 a month to a lease payment. So that's kind of what we're looking at. So obviously, I think July and August and September, we're going to have very strong EV sales numbers before we run out of vehicles. A lot of my dealers are down to their last 10, and by October, they'll be gone. And there's no question sales are going to decrease after that. The question is how much and how are we going to deal with that going forward? If we convert real quickly, and then I'll finish up to the Maryland program. We've all talked about the fact that there's basically a finite $8.25 million amount in there, which makes it makes the marketing of the program from a dealer perspective impossible. We will not advertise the Maryland EV incentive as part of an incentive to get people into the showroom, because we have no idea when you come in whether you're going to get it. It creates significant customer satisfaction problems. Customer comes in, we have to explain to them, you have to get on a waiting list. It makes them very, very unhappy. And then the other thing that and I think Diego mentioned this, and I think it's a very critical piece on any incentive, and that is the incentive needs to be at point of sale. When a customer comes to the showroom and buys the car, we need to give them their $3,000 or $1,000 today. We don't need them to have to go home and fill out a form and send it into MVA. The federal program, and unfortunately, it only lasted a year, not even an entire year, because they're unfortunately doing away with the incentive. But starting on January 1, the dealer gave you the $7,500 tax credit in the showroom. You didn't have to file it on your tax return. It made the program dramatically more attractive to customers. And again, now we have to front the money when we do it that way. We had a little bit of concern. It worked very well at the federal level. I've had no complaints from my dealers getting their money back from the Internal Revenue Service. Again, unfortunately, that goes away. But point of sale going forward is a critical component. So I would say, looking at the Maryland program, looking at our budget constraints, if we keep it at 8.25 million and it's not point of sale, I think the program creates more problems than it solves. I think it becomes a lottery. I don't think it's drawing a lot of extra people in there. In talking to my dealers, again, this could vary, but if the incentive was around $2,000 a vehicle, that would be enough to entice a number of consumers into considering it. And again, you're probably looking to have $25 to $30 million a year in the account. My assumption is the state of Maryland doesn't have the resources to do that. We are certainly not advocating for that. We went through with Delegate Stein and the General Assembly last year, the challenges for the Transportation Trust Fund. We had to take some pretty significant, tax increases on the vehicle purchase. So if it's not realistic that we're going to be able to put more than the 8.25 million in there, then I think we would be more aligned to, hey, let's take that money somewhere else. If there's I think you guys did a great job of, hey, what's the bang for the buck? If we can put it, in charging, great. Or if there's an educational program, or if there's a community program, maybe that 8.25 could be sold, could be used more effectively somewhere else. My dealers don't like the customer coming in and us having to tell them, hey, you don't get the credit. And then the last point is, one of the things that, in talking with Delegate Stein and his committee, we had some conversations about, we don't want to be giving tax incentives to just wealthy, individuals, and these vehicles are expensive, which they are. There's not a big used vehicle market right now in EVs. It's getting bigger because we've been in the market longer. But what's going to start happening over the next 18 months is all these vehicles that we leased over the last, 2.5 years are coming off lease. And a lot of those will go into the used car market. So I think as we go forward, we may need to keep in the back of our minds, if we do come up with an incentive program, that we do think about, hey, let's have a component, because they will be less expensive. It will make them more affordable for a lot of people. Maybe if we can have an incentive on those. Now, again, I know we're trying to get bang for our buck, and I'm not sure when you do the analysis if you don't get as much bang for a buck on a used vehicle. But from an affordability standpoint, we're going to have a lot of these vehicles, coming onto the market. They're going to be priced. Unfortunately, EVs have not held their value at all, so they're going to be coming onto the market at significantly discounted, amounts. But maybe we could look at so from our standpoint, if we can't make the program last an entire year, and if we don't have the resources, maybe we should look at reallocating that. But lastly, if we do it, it definitely needs to be point of sale. I think we've got enough experience now that it's not, we work very well with MVA on a lot of things. We can make this work where we would get reimbursed. And so we don't really have a dramatic concern about that. But that's kind of where we are with incentives. And look, I don't want everyone's probably, certainly the press is going to overreact to, oh my God, EV sales in October are down. Yeah, that's absolutely going to happen, but that's not the end. That's not going to be the end of it. It'll level out. And then like I said, hopefully we're going to come up with some ideas here that are going to help move it back along. So I don't think anybody should overreact, because sales are going to go down. You take $7,500 off the price. It's going to take a hit, but it's going to come back, and it's just a question of how long that's going to take. And maybe there's other things we can do to do that. So.
Excellent. Thank you for those thoughts, Peter. Delegate Stein, turn to you.
Thank you. Thanks, Zach. I'm going to echo a lot of what Peter said. Based on what I've heard from constituents, even from family members, the biggest impediment to increased EV sales remains range anxiety, even with the increased range of new EVs, which has been substantial. So I would say, to the extent that resources are scarce, but we want to target resources where it could make the biggest difference, increasing investment in our charging infrastructure for cars and trucks. And in particular, suggest more money for the community charging grant program, and especially what Diego said about it being substantially oversubscribed, maybe by a factor of 4 to 1. Now, if we still are thinking about, well, do we want to consider incentives for EV purchases? As Peter said, as we all know, the federal $7,500 credit is gone in a few months. I personally am not sure how much the state credit of up to $3,000 made a difference. My sense was that the federal credit was what got buyers' attention. And then there's also the issue that we've discussed about the lottery, sort of concept regarding the state credit, that it ran out. People then get waitlisted. Many of them would already have bought a car, or would be buying a car anyway. So does it make that much difference on the margin? In the absence of the federal credit, would continuing with a $3,000 state credit make a difference? Two possibilities. One Peter mentioned was for used EVs, and then also maybe if we focused on LMI households, where $3,000 could move you in the direction of an EV purchase, whereas for someone who's higher income, it may not have been a driver at all. And I know the Climate Commission made a number of recommendations for LMI households in 2023, so maybe it's worthwhile going back and taking a look at those. And then one last comment was about plug-in hybrids. I know the sale of plug-in hybrids has been historically less than of EVs, but the last stats that I saw was that on a percentage basis, that was increasing substantially. I mean, maybe, it's going from 2 to 3%, whereas EVs are still like maybe 10% of new car sales. But, there's clearly more growing interest among consumers. Again, I defer to Peter, but in plug-in hybrids. So is there any way that, we can modify our incentives to cover those? yeah, those are my suggestions. Thanks for the opportunity.
Thank you so much, Delegate Stein. Really appreciate that. Josh, I see your hand is up, but I do want to get to Cynthia as our last prepared discussion, and then I'll turn to you first when we hit the rest of our discussion. So, Cynthia.
Thank you. I fully agree with both the previous speakers. The incentives at the time of purchase are they're key. They're key. I think the 8.25 million that's the state of Maryland has dedicated to this program, it absolutely has to increase. It absolutely has to increase. I think it's a fundamental piece of moving EVs into the market faster. One of the things you may want to do is restructure it a bit. If you only have the 8.25 million, but you also have, in addition to that, you give consumers, the low moderate income folks get the cash at the hood. Then you have a program structure for folks that could just take the rebate off their state taxes or whatnot. So have a two-pronged approach where you not only give the cash, but you can also give money for those that have the ability to take that incentive off of their taxes. You should also look at non-monetary incentives. What are some other things we can do in terms of, is there parking? Is there free parking you could offer? Is there free registration? Other things that can also incentivize folks to look at EVs. I don't know if you have high occupancy lanes in Maryland, but those really worked in California in terms of getting folks into the vehicles immediately. But those are a few things. The education programs, if we could do more of the education programs, and I do agree that the community grant programs that you have to just set up community infrastructure set up so that folks know where to go to charge. Also, make sure that we have signage. So again, that is clear where you can charge, how much it costs. If there's a dashboard you can create on the state of Maryland website to show, this is the cost, this is what you save, just, pop your zip code in, something simple that helps to educate folks really fast. I think those are some of the things that we can work on together to get those up and running. Thanks.
Thanks so much, Cynthia. Really good thoughts from all of you. Thank you for those contributions. Josh, you had, I don't know if your hand is still up, but can we turn back to you?
Yeah, sure. Briefly, I want to echo Cynthia's points. I also want to state that I have some concern that if there aren't some incentives out there to address the higher costs, particularly for communities that where cost is a primary factor, like LMI communities, that we might not even get the EV in the first place, that the charger would reflect a more efficient cost of a ton of greenhouse gas reduction. If you don't have the EV, no one's going to use a charger. So I wanted to echo Delegate Stein's reference to perhaps targeting incentives to LMI communities.
All right, thanks, Josh. So I'd like to just open it up to the rest of the group here for conversation. There are some key questions in the agenda that I think have all been spoken to on some level, but to help guide some of the opportunities out there. So please just raise your hand as you have thoughts and comments. Peter?
Yeah, I do have a question, and I may not have a definitive answer, but certainly when we were working with Delegate Stein last year in the committees, and even when we were working on the tax issue, that the Transportation Trust Fund in Maryland, had some significant funding challenges. We addressed a lot of those. My assumption is we do not have, $20 million lying around to increase the, for the 28 or the 8.25 to 30 or 25 or whatever. But I want to make sure that's correct. I mean, I think incentive programs Josh makes a good, but look, incentive programs help. Between not having one and having one helps. Again, it doesn't help if it's a lottery, but if you had enough money to do it for an entire year, it's going to help. Again, my assumption is we do not have the resources to increase it to the amount that would make it last for the year. And that, which again, the dealer association is certainly not advocating that we put $21 million more dollars in here, because I just don't think we have those resources. But if I'm incorrect, I want to be clear. An incentive program that gave somebody $2,000 when they came and buy an EV, and it lasted the entire year, we could give everybody the incentive. It's going to help. It's certainly going to help. But again, my assumption is we don't have those funds, and if that's incorrect, then I guess my position changed a little bit.
Peter, I don't think that's incorrect. I think we have a finite number of resources, and
Right.
It's just a question of, again, like, biggest bang for our buck. What are we trying to accomplish, and what is the best way to get there?
Absolutely. Then I agree.
Yeah. So that's where I think we are. We definitely do not have a ton of money. We have like a little bit of money, right? And so we just need to figure out how to spend the little bit of money that we have.
Absolutely.
All right. Thanks for that question and thought. Ben, turn to you.
Thanks. I guess I did have a follow-up actually for Peter, and he made, I think this is trying to understand leasing. So I guess, is there anything out there that shows people going from lease to buy? So you lease and then they decide to buy the car. How successful has the EV program been in getting people to buy?
So that's a really good question, and I think it's too early, because most of these leases became dramatically cheaper about 18 months ago. So the people that lease those vehicles are still in their lease. I'm an example. I leased a BMW iX. I have another 15 months. At the end of that lease, then the way leasing works is when you lease a vehicle, there is an assigned value at the day you lease it. It says, okay, this car is going to be worth $40,000 at the end of the lease. You have the absolute right then to buy that vehicle at the end of the lease for $40,000. If the market is not reflective of that, you can also say, hey, I'm not doing it. And then they're going to come back and say, well, okay, here's the market value is 30 and you can buy it. I think it's too early to tell, are people going to buy their EV at the end of the lease? The number on traditional leases with internal combustion engine cars, especially on luxury vehicles, a lot of people just go into the next lease because they've just decided to lease on an ongoing basis. So they always have a car that's low miles and in warranty. So I think it's going to be an interesting data point to see how many people are going to buy their vehicle at the end of the lease. I mean, been some bad numbers about, people that buy it. There was a pretty significant study done that, 40% of people wouldn't buy another one. I don't put a lot of stock in that. I think it's too early to tell that. From my perspective, I'd buy my, I did it. I got I'm a car guy. I got an EV because I thought it would help when I'm discussing with Shane and Delegate Stein that I at least have some idea what I'm talking about. I'd buy the EV at the end of the lease. The charging's not been great, but the vehicle itself is outstanding. But I think it's too early to get a good feel on these cheaper leases if people are going to do it at the end. But you're going to start next fall. One fall from now, you're going to start seeing those things come off lease, and we're going to see what those numbers look like.
Okay. And Ben, if I can opine on this a bit as well from our perspective and my own experience, EVs are kind of following their own trajectory in this space in particular because the technology is accelerating so quickly that a lot of folks, and to Peter's point, like we've got our luxury buyers and we've kind of got our non-luxury buyers, but for both of those markets, a lot of folks are just chasing the next latest technology rather than keeping their 3-year-old car because suddenly the one from today goes 30% further, charges faster, has more gadgets on board. But it makes for kind of a very interesting space that doesn't follow the traditional rules, is what I'm trying to say.
Okay. Yeah, I guess because part of that is also because you made a statement that the dealers were helping push down those lease payments, then clearly the $7,500 was helping push down the lease payments. But if that's where you're seeing all the action, I guess I was trying to understand how much of that 75 was necessary to get us meaningfully below the lease of a of the comparable cars? Because you implied it was like significantly below a comp.
$210 a month. When we lose, ballpark, it depends on the price of the vehicle. But you increase it, right now you go lease an EV for $399 a month. You can't lease a Honda Civic for $399 a month. But when that goes to $599 a month in October, then that's going to change the equation. Look, the discounting on EVs from the dealers and the manufacturer's perspective is going to continue because we got to sell these vehicles, but we don't have $7,500 more that they could throw into the pot because there's not that kind of margin in any vehicle. So that's going to be the difference.
Right. Okay. Well, I guess I just pause it then for us to think about as we go through this is even if we can't make up if we can figure out a dollar value on those leases that even gets us to 100 or 50 below what the comp is. So you don't need to go the full 75. You're telling me we're 200 plus, but even if you're 50 or 100, that gives you a talking point. So just for us to think about, or maybe somebody on MDE's side to run the numbers to figure out what would that funding look like as we talk about where best to deploy the 8 million. And if, to Shana's point, there's other money that we can look at, maybe some portion of that. Thanks.
Thanks, Ben. And one of the questions that's on my mind, and it may be too soon to tell, given sort of the extent to which we're in flux right now before the tax credits expire, but how will buyer behavior change? To the point you made, Peter, about the way that the federal rebate was designed, it sort of led us to a lease heavy environment as opposed to people purchasing the new vehicle outright. And so curious to see how the incentive structure might shift or play out differently if after the federal rebate expires, people might shift to being more interested in purchasing versus leasing, and how that might affect the exact question that you're raising, Ben. But Louis, you've had your hand up for a while, so let me turn to you.
Thanks, Zach. Actually, if people still want to build on this same question, I'm going to sort of shift the conversation with my question around truck incentives for MEA, and so I can wait if people want to still continue this sort of portion of the discussion.
Sure. Well, why don't we come back to you in a second then? I just have Joe, Bo, and Secretary McElwain. I know you had your hand up if you still want to go as well. So, Joe?
Oh, sorry.
Go ahead, Secretary.
Want me to go?
Yeah, you go.
Very quickly. You pretty much covered it, but what I was going to say is the question was asked about the incentives. Does it really matter? I did read a study from, I think it was, I forgot, but it was a very intensive, extensive study that I can share with you all. But this study surveyed the entire country, as well as Maryland and others. And what people are saying is the incentives, particularly the one from the federal government, made a difference in their decision to get an EV. So I think the incentives, just from what I read, what I know, are really important. The next thing I'll make is there was a question about the lease. Because we do our own surveying and speaking with people, I think at the end of the lease, which was the question, will they buy the car? Because of like what Dana Stein said, the biggest issue is the rain anxiety, and they didn't, if they didn't have access to charging, then that would be a problem for them, and that's what would make the consumer not want to buy it again or give it back to the dealer. So those were some of the concerns that we've been hearing. So I just wanted to just put that in just as a placeholder of concerns that we've heard, that we're aware of. But everything else you said is very valid as well. But there's something to think about. Thank you.
Thank you, Secretary. Go ahead, Joe.
So we at MDOT might not call the EV tax credit a lottery. That said, it may feel like it to some whenever it shows up. But I think some of the conversation is fair around the current utility of the EV tax credit. Opining here just as a thought of, there was a goal and a purpose in 2022 when the law passed to try to incent rapid growth of EVs on Maryland roads. I think it has achieved that. I think other tools such as the federal tax credit that the secretary just referenced put together has really helped us scale. We're not where we want to be, right? We've got goals of 1 million plus EV or plug-in EVs on our road by 2030. We're not on pace to get there, but we are still seeing growth, and we're optimistic that we'll get there. I think that the market, and this is me speaking with my team here, the cost of an internal combustion engine versus a cost of an EV or plug-in hybrid EV actually is not all that different today. And we think that, the market is trending in a way that the EVs are actually going to be price comparative to an internal combustion engine of certain categories and type. I mean, Ford's news yesterday is optimistic that they are going to be moving that direction. So if we were to think about what a post-27 tax credit incentive looks like, I'd love to visit what are the goals or the outcomes that we're looking for, right? Is the goal to get more cars on the road faster? Then, the answer from Mr. Kitzmiller might make sense, right? But the cost will probably go up both on the credit per car, as well as just the amount of cars that could access it. So the cost of the state. We might not have resources. That's a challenge that we'll have to grapple with. I think as we think about it, and given a friendly handoff to Louis here in a second, where we don't have cost comparison, but where we have opportunities to see growth to drive GHG reductions is really on the medium and heavy duty freight side. We'll be working on electrifying freight capacity from EV chargers, both at the port through the Clean Ports Grant, I-95 through the CPRG grant through EPA, and then, knock on wood, we'll have I-81 electrified through our CFI grant, all by the end of the decade, right? But getting the maturation of the truck industry and the fleet there is harder. The cost differential between an ICE truck versus an EV truck is still sizable, and maybe there's opportunity of greater and higher return to try to accelerate the pace in that space versus maybe where we've seen sizable gain on the personal sedan or personal vehicle. But those are just some thoughts and reactions, and it's not necessarily well fleshed, but certainly considerations that we've been talking about here at the Maryland Department of Transportation.
Thanks, Joe. And Bo, I know you're actually a good bridge to the fleet and trucking side of this. So go ahead. Oh, you're on mute, sir.
That would help. There we go. Fleet is what I wanted to talk about, and Peter hit on this a bit. And it's something that's going to be really interesting to observe in the electric vehicle market in the coming years is going to be the impact on residuals without the tax credit. EVs have been depreciating faster than their gas-powered counterparts, but it's in large part because the used market kind of bakes in that 7,500 as kind of not real. So if you bought a car for, easy math, $30,000, when it hits the used market, its new value, like to the consumer, was considered 22.5, right? So it's going to be interesting when that credit goes away and what it does to the used market. But I want to talk about the used market and what the state can do with its power in increasing that space. And what the governor can do administratively is look at something like EVs as a rule in fleet procurement across state agencies, rather than ICE as a rule, EV where it fits, EV everywhere, ICE where it can't. That would lead to a huge used market in its due course, of course. But thinking about unique, creative ideas that this group can recommend, this is, and it was said earlier, EVs are on parity with gas cars in a lot of applications. And that's something that the state can do, unilaterally. So that would be something that we would advocate this group consider.
Bo, thanks for those comments. I just want to respond quickly. I think in a perfect world, we would be doing that. There is obviously a cost issue here. And this goes back to the larger question of how is the state spending its dollars? Is there a bigger bang for the buck if the state spends its dollars in that way, in procuring mostly electric vehicles for its own fleet? Or are those dollars better spent as incentives, right? So it's all kind of part of the conversation about how the state's using its very limited resources.
All right. Well, Lewis, I know you had a number of things on your mind with respect to the moving toward the medium and heavy duty incentives.
Yeah, no, thanks, Zach. I appreciate it. So I guess this is a question more for MEA because I do follow every year, and I know you guys just released probably in the last 3 or 4 months or 3 or 4 weeks, kind of the medium and heavy duty grant program recipients. Do you use all of the funds available every year? I guess is my first question. And then maybe my second question is, how much do you find that the incentives are a driver to those organizations, which I know are not all private companies, right? There's a divergence of or a plethora of different organizations that apply for that money. How much are incentives, we think, a factor in that decision for medium and heavy duty applications?
Really good question. So for the medium and heavy duty grant program, each year, and I'll be very specific, we had the applicant base for 100% of our program. For the first year, we had an oversubscription of double. We had double the amount of applications. This year, we had a little bit more. The reason why we did not award as many is that halfway through signing the grant agreement, tariffs and inflation occurred, and through tariffs increasing the cost of vehicles, they rejected the grant agreement. Okay. So to your point of our incentives a really big factor, really with the tariffs increasing the cost by 100-200%, it really was a factor for at least our off-road agricultural vehicles. We know that that through at least $20,000 extra of a $60,000 vehicle. So that makes a difference of if these businesses, if these fleets are going to adopt for the long haul. Okay. Yeah, good question.
No, and I appreciate that. And then just sort of one observation, and I know there's a lot of diversity, right, in the entities that have gotten awards under this program. But there are some similarities, and that to me should be on the, I'll say fleet side. I don't like to use the word fleet because that means a lot of different types of entities. But those segments from an operating standpoint, I think, are the ones that we should be targeting for medium and heavy duty, right? Because they're clearly ones that believe that there are opportunities for them to invest in electric vehicles, right? Based on the current operational limitations that exist today. It's just reality. This isn't passenger cars. There is so much divergence in the operational needs of trucking companies that, you know, there are certain segments that make a lot of sense, and that's where we ought to be focusing our efforts. And it's good to hear that from your perspective, Diego, that the incentives are making a difference. So I appreciate that feedback.
And just to further your point of I mean, what it sounds like to me again is that there's some fleets that are ready for it. There's some fleets that will continue to go towards electrification. They see the cost benefit analysis, but they're large fleets that have already absorbed that upfront cost. It's the smaller fleets, the mom and pop businesses that are having a little bit of a trouble. And perhaps for those, you know, when we're speaking about the carrot and the stick, if we're going to allow them to get some type of waiver, speaks to the electric school buses. In the very least, we should help them with a plan. If they can get at least a plan, then sure, they can reject or they can get a waiver But in the very least, for those fleets that are not as prepared, planning for our electric school bus program has been extremely well received. Washington County is starting with their plans. Rural counties are going to be starting with their plans. So we should look at all facets. I think one of them was non-monetary. So maybe we can have MDE, MES, help them out with technical assistance.
Thank you.
All right. I think we are going to move toward closing for this meeting. I'd like to thank all of you for your patience as I dealt with my tech issues throughout this meeting. And I'd like to thank Zach for leading this meeting. I thought the discussion was really fantastic. I thought the presentations were great. I'm really looking forward to the work that we're all going to do together. I know that I keep saying that, but I really mean it. And I really appreciate everybody's time today and as we move forward. The next meeting is going to be on September 9th. That will be an in-person meeting with a hybrid option. I think the more people that can come in person, the better. It just helps to facilitate a more robust discussion, in my opinion. But if you can't make it, that's no problem. If you have any questions or concerns in between now and then, feel free to email me or Zach. And otherwise, thank you all. And I look forward to seeing you.